Hi everyone, this is Bradford Rogers, and this is my BA presentation. My working title is Effervescence for Sale, Lollapalooza, Independent Musicians, and the Modern Musical Experience Industry. I'll explain what I mean by that title as I go through my presentation. So, for my research project, I was interested in investigating how the music industry has changed from the 90s through the first decade of the 2000s and to today. Particularly, I was interested in the digital revolution, the mass democratization of information technologies and the internet, and also the legacy of Napster on the music recording industry. So to investigate this question, Lollapalooza represented a really good data sample for me to look at because it includes the artists that have played Lollapalooza include over 1,300 artists in both the tour, which lasted from 91 through 97, and then the festival that we know today that has been run out of Grant Park since 2005. And also, it was a good opportunity to look at the increased participation of independent artists at Lollapalooza to also lend some more insight into how the music industry has changed from the 90s to the 2000s in a more general sense and in relation to how independent artists are competing with their label-affiliated peers. So my data methods included compiling spreadsheets of all the artists that played at Lollapalooza and constructing network graphs based on their record label affiliation, and to graphically demonstrate changing relationships between bands and labels, and to show the increased concentration of independent artists year by year. I'll explain that more later. Once I had identified independent artists that had been successful at Lollapalooza, I engaged in case studies to investigate exactly what they have done in their career from a marketing standpoint, particularly in order to compete with their label-affiliated peers. My hypothesis for the project is that the music industry has changed such that information technologies have democratized, and therefore the music industry has democratized, and this has opened the door for independent artists to participate on a much greater level. And also, I will be arguing that the record industry has effectively, because of the democratization of technologies and the legacy of Napster, the industry has shifted from a commodification of selling records to the commodification of the music social experience, and that independent artists that are successful are those that fully engage with that shift in the industry. So I'll explain more about that as we go along. First, some history on Lollapalooza. It was initially founded by Perry Farrell of Jane's Addiction to be the Jane's Addiction Farewell Tour. Featured a handful of other artists, smaller compared to their other tours later on, but it was a North American tour, and it was received very well in its first year, and so Perry Farrell decided to make it an annual tour featuring a lot more artists. And according to Perry Farrell said that the success of the tour was based on what he called the alternative nation, or just this massive upswell of popularity for the alternative rock genre. Perry Farrell also cites the level of cultural engagement presented at Lollapalooza as also a big draw factor. The tour, as it still does today, features a lot of kiosks and tents featuring cultural advocates, environmental advocates, artisans, stuff like that. So it was encompassed cultural experience beyond just that which was presented by the musicians. From 91 through 97, the tour experienced a lot of growth. A lot more artists were being signed on. Initially, there was just a main stage with the top billed artists. Then they added a side stage in '92, indie stage in '95, I believe, to showcase some indie label bands. But in '96, Lollapalooza began to run into some issues. There's a conflict between Perry Farrell and the organizers, his Jane's Addiction's bookers that ended up becoming Lollapalooza's booker, conflicted over signing Metallica to Lollapalooza in '96 as the headliner. Perry Farrell felt that Metallica, while part of the Alt Nation upswell, didn't really embody or represent the sort of values that he saw Lollapalooza championing. So Perry Farrell quit the Lollapalooza organization out of protest. So '96 was a much more new metal focused show, and for whatever reason, it might have been Perry Farrell's concerns with Metallica representing Lollapalooza. '96 tour did not go very well. '97 tour was even worse. They had extremely low ticket sales. And then Lollapalooza in '98, the bookers were completely unable to book a headliner. No big act wanted to be involved with the tour. And perhaps indicative of that, Eric Weisbart of Spin Magazine in '98 wrote, "Lollapalooza is as comatose as alternative rock right now." So Perry Farrell said that he felt it was based on the upswell of Alternative Nation. It could be that, toward the end of the '90s, the music industry was beginning to shift, and Lollapalooza basically lost touch with their audience. And a few years later, at this point, up to 2003, up to this point, Bonnaroo and Coachella had been founded, possibly off of the example that the Lollapalooza tour set in the '90s. And you'll see a lot more people in America attending these festivals, and big tours like the Warped Tour is another good example. So based on the success and change in the music industry, Perry Farrell not only brought Jane's Addiction back together, but brought the Lollapalooza tour back together to be a sort of reunion tour for Jane's Addiction. The 2003 tour was met with moderate success, but didn't sell enough tickets to mimic the success of the '91, '92, '93 tours of Lollapalooza. In 2004, a tour was organized, but ultimately they were unable to sell enough tickets to justify the tour, so it was canceled. At this point, it's clear that Lollapalooza reevaluated their strategy, their business plan, what they wanted Lollapalooza to be. They wanted to adapt and cater to the modern musical audience. So they ended up teaming up with C3 Presents and organized a destination festival event, which is the current iteration of Lollapalooza as we know it, which is held annually at Grant Park, Chicago, beginning in 2005. 2005 tour was a massive success, and I interviewed the president of C3 Presents, and he cites a much greater emphasis on artists' touring capacity, meaning how many people on average they could get to come to one of their shows, rather than the artist's record sale capacity for determining who booked Lollapalooza. So basically there's a much bigger emphasis on artists who could perform live, who could really deliver that live social musical experience, rather than just those who could move enough records. He cites that was a big organizational move for the tour, or for the festival rather, and it's been quite successful since 2005, bringing in millions of dollars of revenue to the city of Chicago. They have a contract with Chicago Park District, Chicago Park Council through 2018, $13 million deal with the city. And Lollapalooza has also begun to expand internationally. In 2011, it expanded to Chile. Based on that success, it was in Chile and Brazil in 2012, and in 2014, Lollapalooza will be expanding to Argentina and Israel. So I attended Lollapalooza 2013, mostly because I really wanted to, but also to perform ethnography for this research project to kind of get a feel for what exactly it's like to be a part of this experience. Big thing I noticed and was validated by my interview with the president of C3 Presents is that the organization of the festival is incredibly important. There's so many people coming in and just flooding the Grant Park, Millennium Park area of Chicago. So logistically, it's crazy how much time and organization they put into manipulating the foot traffic of the festival. According to Charlie Walker, president of C3 Presents, they plan out which artists play on which stage based on how they may be able to optimize foot traffic around the festival grounds so that there's not too much congestion, and also people are going by the merch tents, they're going by the food tents, the bars, all of the cultural engagement opportunities, kiosks. So you're moving around a lot, you're experiencing a lot of the show, there's a lot of shuffling, you're meeting a lot of new people. And that's all by design. Also, a big difference from the tour to the festival is that there are more days, there are more stages, way more artists. So, along with that, foot traffic being moved around, you're just experiencing a very vast array of this representative sample of the popular modern music scene. Beyond all the great shows I went to, an extremely notable aspect of my experience at Lollapalooza was how social it was. I read an article after I went to Lollapalooza. It was a blog article, and it's a bit of a fluff piece that argues that music festivals are the closest thing to social utopia in the modern world. I don't know if I would go that far, but there was definitely a marked difference in how people were dealing with each other. Everyone's much more friendly. Everyone's ready to meet new people, ready to branch out, to be more outgoing than they normally would be, in their day-to-day lives with, complete strangers. I ended up, after the show, meeting a group of English people who, just because my name was Bradford and we had gone to a couple of the same shows during Lollapalooza, we struck it off and they ended up taking me out the whole night after Lollapalooza ended. And I recognized at the time that was just this ephemeral sort of social experience that likely would not have happened in most any other context. And I have plenty of other examples, but I won't go into that. Now, but overall, what I felt about the festival experience reminded me very much of Durkheim's writing on collective effervescence. I particularly like this passage from Durkheim's translator, Karen E. Fields, describing collective effervescence. She says, "Swept away, the participants experience a force external to them, which seems to be moving them, and by which their very nature is transformed. They experience themselves as grander than in ordinary times. They do things they would not do at other times. They feel, and at that moment really are, joined with each other and with the totemic being. They come to experience themselves as sharing one and the same essence." This really resounded with me in my experience, being part of the crowds of Lollapalooza. Particular moment of note would be my experience at the Major Lazer show, where Diplo, one half of Major Lazer, took a break in one of the songs to command the audience to take off their shirts and in unison with the drop of the song, throw their shirts in the air. And it was just amazing witnessing just that effervescent mass organization, just people just doing what Diplo was saying because they felt they were part of something bigger that audience, and they're just swept away, a force external to them, just reacting to the music in a very passionate way. So that was my experience at Lollapalooza. That was my historical research. So to return to my research question, I'm interested in how has the music industry changed in the last couple of decades, particularly in regard to independent musicians. How are independent musicians able to compete with their label-affiliated peers? And again, my hypothesis is the music industry has shifted from the commodification of records, the commodification of the social musical experience, and that the democratization of information and technology has also democratized the music industry, thus allowing independent artists to capitalize on the social musical experience shift in the market. So before I get into my data, it's also helpful to go over a little background on the music industry and some basic shifts that have happened in all the different aspects of the music industry due to the explosion of technology and the Napster legacy as well. For our conceptual purposes, I've divided the music industry and all of its processes into two hemispheres, the first being the creative hemisphere and the second being the commercial hemisphere. I'll get to the commercial hemisphere in a bit. So in the creative hemisphere, some sub-factors you have are musical education, the compositional process, collaboration and performance, and production. So some examples about how things have changed. In the 90s, everything was, without the internet, without proliferated internet technologies, everything was very physical, everything was very one-to-one, communication-wise, and everything was... There are very high barriers to entry to participating in the creative musical process. For example, looking at education, in order to attain any sort of musical education, you'd have to attend lessons, read instructional books, attend a musical education program, any of which of those options could be quite expensive. Composition involved physically writing music, using an affordable audio recording device to do demos, but there was extremely restricted access to digital audio workstation, DAWs, like Ableton, Logic Pro, Pro Tools. These are all some examples of DAWs. Very limited access because they were quite expensive. And in terms of collaboration and performance, again, this was very physically mediated. You'd have to, meet people, post flyers on bulletin boards and coffee shops, meet people that you would like to play with, to collaborate with. And as today, they would perform for ephemeral audiences. It's a little different today, as I'll get to that. In Table 2, I'll talk about booking, which is the commercial hemisphere. And then production, there wasn't a whole lot of access to knowledge behind what it took to produce music. So often musicians would have to meet with a trained producer or be a trained producer themselves, going through an educational, higher educational program for that purpose. And again, there was restricted access to production equipment and software. It was just extremely expensive. So in the Audis, the first decade of the 2000s, some big changes in all of these aspects. In terms of education, if you want to learn anything about music, you can go on YouTube and find hundreds of thousands of tutorial videos and otherwise online lessons everywhere. So in addition to those educational opportunities you had in the 90s, you also have these much cheaper, much more democratized options in the Audis. Again, in terms of composition, with the proliferation of technology, much more increased access to music writing software. Computers are much more powerful, so they can handle these digital audio workstations, and they're also much cheaper. They would cost thousands of dollars in the 90s, and now they cost less than $1,000, can be much cheaper, down to $100 for professional quality digital audio workstation. In terms of collaboration and performance, very much the same as in the 90s, but the difference now is remote collaboration is extremely popular. Seeing a lot of bands coming together where they might have met on tour or something, but they live on opposite ends of the globe, so they can collaborate, send tracks back and demos back and forth to each other over the internet, which is pretty cool. A good example of a band like that is Pin Me Down, whose name is based on pinning each other down to with their busy schedules on opposite ends of the globe to send these tracks to each other so they could put a record together. And they ended up putting one together, all based on remote collaboration. It's pretty cool. Also, fans now have access to Ustream rehearsals. This is something a lot of bands have done, where they will, through the website Ustream, will put their rehearsals online, and fans can just come in and watch that. So it's definitely a form of engagement with social engagement with the audience. You're seeing a lot more pay-per-view live shows online and on cable, HD music channels, which make the performance aspect of music a little less ephemeral, and recording it, a lot more people can have access to that sort of like live energy being depicted in the videos. They can also post performance videos on YouTube. Big marketing potential there as well. And then production, as in musical education, it's much easier now to gain access to production knowledge. You can find, again, thousands of these tutorial videos on YouTube. And also, as before, there's much better access to production equipment and software. It's just cheaper, and computers are much more powerful. And then on the commercial hemisphere, things have changed a lot too. In the commercial hemisphere, you have the factors of representation, promotion and marketing, manufacturing and distribution, and artist booking. So in the 90s, again, everything was very physically mediated, and the industry is completely dominated by labor representation. It's a very large barrier to entry. At the professional level, representation is typically handled by a record label for most musicians in the 90s. Promotion and marketing, again, handled by the label. This would involve strictly press interviews, physical advertising, like in magazines, or billboards, what have you, and radio airplay, a very large source of investment for marketing musicians, even today, but to a lesser extent. Sorry, let me get back. In terms of manufacturing and distribution, this involves putting the record together and getting it out to record stores, getting it out to the fans. This would require a network of record labels and record distributors to ship music to stores and individual listeners. So obviously, big barrier to entry. Virtually the only way a band in America could have an international audience is if they're affiliated with a major label that has international distribution methods. Artist booking, artist or label would hire a booking agent at the professional level, so that would be a completely outsourced process. Then in the audience, things change quite a bit. Now, because of internet technologies, in many different ways, artists may fully represent themselves at a professional level, and you're seeing this a lot more. Independent artists, being fully having full agency to represent themselves in the commercial side of their music project, because so much more information is readily available. It's not just relegated to the record labels anymore because of the internet. So in this regard, promotion and marketing, much more doable for the individual. Record labels are not needed as much in this regard due to the accessibility of blog exposure and social media marketing tactics. Manufacturing and distribution has largely been nullified as a barrier to entry for musicians connecting with a global audience. Now you have direct-to-fan digital distribution, online services like SoundCloud and Bandcamp that are free for artists to put their get their music out there to an international audience. And then online stores like iTunes and Google Play make music extremely accessible for a global market. And then artist booking, as with representation, may be handled by independent artists at the professional level, just because so much more information about the record industry and how to navigate it is now accessible to anybody because of the internet. So in summary, the democratization of information and technology has allowed for the democratization of the music industry. This is by no means relegated to the music industry. A great example of where I've seen a similar process of democratization is with Etsy.com, which is an open marketplace. Anybody can set up their shop on Etsy and sell artisanal goods, handmade goods, and reach an international market on that regard. My sister herself has started a dancewear company who they've started supplying ballet dance skirts to schools in Japan. Something that it's a small business. She's sending a few hundred skirts out there, but something that would certainly never have been possible in the 90s. Just this high school girl, putting some skirts together and reaching an international market just wouldn't have been possible. And now it is with digital technologies. All right, so my data method involved to really to more quantitatively and less qualitatively analyze how the music industry has changed. I looked at the data set represented by every artist that has played at Lollapalooza since 1991. For my purposes, I collected over 1,200 of these artists to analyze. I documented their bill placement, their play schedule, and their record label affiliation. In order to identify independent artists, through my visually demonstrated through my graphs, and also statistical analysis. So here's an example of one of the network graphs. It's kind of problematic at this point. I need to add more information. You might see there are a lot of one-to-one node connections in this graph. It is telling that Warner Brothers, who's Jane's Addiction, record representation in the 90s, have a very large role in Lollapalooza at this time. But the graph doesn't really tell you a lot more because there are these one-to-one dyadic relationships. So what I want to do to make the graphs more open for analysis, because they're not really useful right now, and more visually engaging, is to not only document the artist-to-label relationships, but also the label-to-label relationships, because often you'll have many of these labels are related to each other. They're either a umbrella label. Columbia Records is over here, is a bigger record label, and almost undoubtedly has several intermediate range record labels that are basically affiliates of Columbia Records. So I want to graph those relationships, and that will give you a more connected graph that I think will be open for much more analysis going forward. So far, the graph thing is just kind of a pretty way to present the data, but I would like to make it more than that. And I think documenting those label-to-label relationships, particularly adding nodes for major label, intermediate label, and independent label to connect to the artist, will make the graphs more rich and more analytical. But regardless of the graphs, I have identified several independent artists so far to investigate how they've engaged with the changing market landscape to be successful with their record label affiliated peers. Some of these are Pretty Lights, favorite example of mine, played Lollapalooza in 2012. What's notable about his strategy is how he's developed this concept of the PL family, or just this community of fans that are active tours. Like it's a big in the scene of Pretty Lights fans. It's a big point of pride. Knowing how many shows you've gone to, bragging about how many shows you've gone to, and there's a growing community of fans who are like that, who communicate mostly on the internet. A very large fan base in Colorado, where Pretty Lights is from, where I'm from. He's ubiquitous out there in the electronic music scene. So he's really done a lot to really engage with the community created by people who come together for his music. He started a label, Pretty Lights Music. He just recorded Color Map of the Sun independently, put $300,000 of his own money that he raised from tour revenue. He's basically been touring constantly since 2009. Analog Future Tour is his current tour, which has been showcasing A Color Map of the Sun, and which was Grammy nominated album, which is crazy for independent artists at this level. Then he organized a pay-per-view event recently that was quite successful, and he's got, in terms of the musical experience, which is now what artists and music business execs are trying to sell. He's engaged with that with an extremely immersive next-generation website, which I definitely recommend checking out. It's very cool. A couple other examples, Lady Gaga. Similar to the Pretty Lights family, she's got her Little Monsters, the fan community, which she has a lot of pride in. Interesting part about Lady Gaga, she might not come across as an independent artist, but I didn't even know this. In my research, found out that she played Lollapalooza as an independent artist in 2007, and got there, on her own with Lady Starflight was her collaborator. So it was Lady Gaga and Lady Starflight. And then, a lot happened between 2007 and 2010. Lady Gaga played Lollapalooza again in 2010. And at that point, obviously it became successful. She was, represented by every major music outlet. But a lot of people have cited Lady Gaga's success and that explosion of success to her level of cultural engagement, how much she engages with social matters in and out of her music. Obviously, gay rights issues are a big topic for Lady Gaga. Other cultural engagement, she's involved in fashion, obviously, with House of Gaga. Another way for her to, make her musical brand, extend beyond just music. Radiohead is another example. They basically introduced to the music industry the pay what you want price model for selling music with In Rainbows, I believe in 2009. They ended up making $8 on average per album with the pay what you want, no minimum price method. And you're seeing now a lot of record labels are actually, because their sales have been dwindling, have been adopting this price model to some success. Then Macklemore is another interesting example because he is independent in the creative sphere, but dependent in the commercial sphere. And what I mean by that is he's completely independent in the creative process, putting his music together, recording it, all of that, but he is represented on major labels, I believe Warner Brothers, to distribute his music to an international audience because he is a massive pop star. And at that level of selling that many records, record labels are still pretty relevant to having those international distributory connections. So some other examples outside of Lollapalooza, this focus on the live element being brought back into electronic music after a few years. If you've been seeing a lot of DJs hiding behind computers. Emancipator Ensemble, Big Gigantic, Keys and Crates, all examples of bands that very electronic focused bands that have brought live collaboration on stage, live instrumentalists and collaborators back into electronic music because they make for a funner show, sell more tour tickets. I've been working an internship at Thrill Jockey Records, and when I started, they're vinyl-focused records. So the most interesting thing has been seeing how they've survived in this post-Napster world, where record distribution isn't a very large market at all. But they basically carved out a niche for themselves as the musical experience market, in the same way that live shows are, with selling vinyl. Those who are into vinyl, are into the totally immersive tactile experience of, you go to a record store, you dig through a crate of records, the artwork is way bigger than anything you would see in any medium today, be it CD or a lot of people consume music digitally. You've got that little iTunes square with your artwork. Much bigger artwork, then you've got the feel and the smell of the record, just like you can hear the grooves, the pops and crackles when you're playing it on the record. It's a very immersive music listening experience. And they've really capitalized on people who listen to music in that way, who want that sort of recorded, albeit recorded, but still very experiential music experience. I'll skip that. And then, as I mentioned before, Deep Elm recently adopted a pay what you want model, resembling Radiohead's own model that they introduced in 2009. I've also, for the last couple of years, been experimenting with my own music project, and it's a good example of everything I've talked about with how accessible the industry is now to independent amateur musicians. I was able to afford a digital audio workstation to get started with audio production. I was able to learn everything I needed to get going by watching YouTube videos. I was able to post my music online via SoundCloud, free service, and I now have almost 7,000 listens to my tracks since last summer. And these are mostly from America because I've been doing a lot of person-to-person marketing. But I also have listeners in Australia, Japan, Russia, all over Europe, sprinkled through Asia. And that's something, again, that never would have been possible in the 90s and is now possible with the democratization of information and technology. So, in conclusion, the music industry has shifted. My research has shown that the music industry has shifted from the commodification of records to the commodification of the social musical experience. And the democratization of information and technology has allowed for the democratization of the music industry, therefore opening it up to independent artists to participate on a much greater level. And for further study, I believe further sociological analysis, particularly related to internet interaction and online community building, such research will reveal additional effective marketing strategies for the music industry and for art and independent merchants in general. So that's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to hearing any feedback that you might have. Thank you.